This is Adam Gaston-Smith, the Manager of Client Engagement at Peters & Associates, and we also have Bruce Ward, who is our VP of Business Strategy on the line.
That's me.
So today's topic is Microsoft 365 and subtitled the Matryoshka doll of enterprise software suites. You might also know those as Russian nesting dolls. And I think if you've got some familiarity with the suite already, you probably understand what I mean, but it is truly a suite of suites. So we'll go ahead and get into it right now. From an agenda perspective, we're going to start out by high-leveling what's in the suite specifically, along with some of the basic licensing information. We don't want to bore everybody with complete licensing logistics, but we will at least high level it so you understand if you're, say, on an Office 365 E3 today, what does, what's added by going to something like Microsoft 365, where there's some bundling and some price breaks that occur there. So we're going to try and level set everything there. And then this is a really big suite, as I mentioned. If we were to try to go into deep specifics and deep demos of everything, it would take hours. So our goal today is to be higher level, focusing on what makes Microsoft 365 real, what we actually are seeing in other organizations and what we're deploying most commonly. We're happy to go deeper level in other conversations, and we do have other webinars that we do that we drill down a little bit deeper. But because this is so broad, it's hard to zero in just too deep today. But we'll gladly take questions offline and do separate presentations. We'll share a little bit of what we've learned. So aside from why are customers calling us about M365 and what types of initiatives are we starting with. We'll also talk a little bit about some of the things that we've learned just from working with it for so long and what makes something successful versus unsuccessful, or what kind of hidden gems have we discovered within Microsoft 365 that add a lot of value without being necessarily a large undertaking. And then we will have a little bit of demo in here. Like I said, since we're focused on the high level stuff, it's not going to be deep, admin panes and setting up new users and all that fun stuff, but it will at least give you an idea of what we're looking at and how somebody's managing the environment.
Yeah, essentially we decided to prioritize just based on things that we think customers are actually using, not have purchased and not deployed. So we'll give you our eyes and input if we can.
Yep. So as we mentioned before, this is what we consider a suite of suites. So what is Microsoft 365? Inside our Russian nesting doll, you have Office 365. There's two flavors of this. There's Microsoft 365 E3 and Microsoft 365 E5. If you've been dealing with the Microsoft Cloud licensing game for a little while in Office 365, you have some idea of what that means, but we'll talk a little bit more specifically about that.
And there's other flavors of 365 also. There's the E1 and K1 and other plans and individual items, but in general, the Microsoft 365 suite contains just Office 365 E3 or E5. So you only have two choices. At least we don't get to be mind-numbed with that. Just two choices there. So,
yep. So Office 365, of course, is one major pillar. Enterprise Mobility plus Security Suite is another major pillar of Microsoft 365. And then finally, Windows 10. So that encompasses the whole Microsoft 365 suite. From a licensing perspective, Bruce, I'm going to turn it over to you to handle these next couple of slides, as I think you're a little bit better tuned to the licensing requirements.
Sure. Yeah, this is just kind of a little more granular look at the elements that are contained within either Office 365, as you kind of move left to right along the bottom row. That's a lot of the items that are within Office 365. Or within the Enterprise Mobility Suite, both E3 and E5. So just try to differentiate a little bit amongst, kind of layering on. Oftentimes people own, and I guess it's our general statement that a lot of people own Office 365 E3, right? And so kind of starting at the bottom, what are some things you get with Office 365 E3? Like, how can you take advantage of the licensing you already own, and what are some things you might not be doing today, but maybe you could, such as MDM for Office 365, or just turning on activity logging and maybe creating some basic alerts out of there. Azure AD Basic certainly allows you to set up single sign-on. So there's some basics, and then you kind of just layer on, moving on up the chain there in various buckets and categories. So I don't think we're gonna. I think this is just kind of another view of the nesting dolls, and I think it's not our goal to have you understand every little way that Microsoft can bundle their products together. But at the same time, it's an interesting way to do it. So, Adam, I'd say that's it just on that slide, and similarly on this slide. So there are some changes that are coming this month. Okay, this is February 1st. Now, if you're in the education, I believe they're not coming until April. But effectively, if I was guessing, I'm guessing that that E5 sales are not what Microsoft wants. And I'm guessing that people don't feel the need to buy the whole E5 suite to get some of the functionality they want. There are bits and pieces that they want. And so what Microsoft has done is kind of unbundled the bundle, right? I think the goal is, in general, when customers buy the bundle, great, there's a lot of functionality in there, but I think there are certain times where people just want some security enhancements, or they want to, be more compliant, or kind of in the columns you're seeing here, they want to buy E5 for, meetings and calling reasons. So, Adam, as you kind of advance this a little bit, you'll notice there's some changes that occur over on the left-hand side, and, we'll just kind of advance it, I think, a little more just to see that the bundles can occur, and you can purchase just that level of identity and threat protection for effectively a bundled price, right? So you don't need to buy the whole E5. You can instead buy identity and threat protection for lower price, or information protection and compliance. If you start to need two of these buckets, as you can imagine, when you start breaking things apart, oftentimes the sum is greater than the whole. So, if you start needing two or three elements of this, it's probably best to just purchase the whole bundle. But again, we don't want to mind numb you. Just want to let you know that we are knowledgeable regarding the very latest changes. Some of these changes are just in effect as of February 1st, and in some cases still rolling out. But if you have a desire to consume some of this technology, or see some things today that you're like, I gotta have it, know that there's smart ways to purchase, and it doesn't necessarily mean you buy the whole thing. I would say that's it. Adam, on the next slide. I think that, again, we're not going to drill into each item here, but as you can see, various cases can be made, whether, if you start with an E3 and there are certain features and functions you'd like, you can imagine that the smart way to purchase, you could buy something for $25 or the same thing for $62, right? So there's definitely some logic to, trying to figure out and ascertain which items are going to be you're going to not only purchase, but purchase and adopt, right? And that's really where Adam and I come into play. We are going to try very hard today to not focus on what the software does, but focus on the capabilities that you might be able to unleash, or might be able to displace if you have current software today, and just kind of get to the brass tacks of things. So, Adam, with that.
Okay, so let's go ahead and start in the Office 365 space. As Bruce said, I think the vast majority of our customers do own Office 365 licensing, and that licensing is probably deployed to varying degrees. But just a high level for those who are somewhat new to it, Office 365 is built on email, it's the Office applications, and it's collaboration, and it's conferencing. And what I mean in collaboration is, document management, document sharing and collaboration, and things like OneDrive and SharePoint Online. Email, of course, is Exchange Online, and conferencing happening through both Skype for Business today, but very soon, and for some of you already, Microsoft Teams as the new chat-based and web conferencing platform that Microsoft has. So all of those tools make up Office 365. Um, and this is partially this next piece here is why I was kind of looking at this as these Russian nesting dolls, because you also have these other things that Bruce and I end up talking about a lot, like data loss prevention or DLP and e-discovery, and equally we could have multi-factor authentication and audit log review. There's so many elements that we could break these down into in terms of what's included and the types of features that should be turned on. There really is a lot bundled here that's all wrapped into this licensing.
And I might add, Adam, just that, from left to right, that really is the order of value that our customers are seeing. We've been deploying Office 365 for quite a long time. I always throw out the number 70% of the people probably made the decision, could be higher than that, to go to Office 365 and purchase Office 365 almost exclusively for email purposes. Okay? Majority of our customers for that purpose. Now, you start to bundle in Office as an example, and the E3 license, as I think I mentioned earlier in this webinar, was more like at 90% of kind of what we're seeing people purchase. And the reason is because email full-featured, Office licensing, the last time they purchased Office licensing was a while back, and or it's attractive to just buy Office by user and not really care about how many devices they have or if they want to load this on their home devices. So there's some nice benefits to that area. So just those left two dolls, if you will, are really the big part of it. And then, potentially they jump into, the Skypes, the OneDrives, the SharePoints, to the right. Oftentimes the nesting dolls on the right, DLP, e-discovery, and email encryption, are the dolls that they want to kind of take advantage of even before potentially getting into Skype and OneDrive and SharePoint. So we're seeing, kind of round two with our customers over the last, 18 months, a couple of years in terms of people coming back and saying, okay, I got my email up there and I've got my Office organized and, they're on the latest version, and we really want to start taking advantage of some of the conferencing and collaboration now.
Yep. So, what are these top use cases that we see most organizations going to? And like we said, I think most of you already own this licensing, and a big part of that licensing decision was probably for the email piece. So a lot of you may already be there, but email migration was a big reason that people initially were looking to Office 365, getting out of the email business, moving things to Microsoft's cloud. So I think that just kind of leads the way in terms of use cases. File share replacement is another common case, though I would say the number of our customers that have gone through with this is probably still less than half, Bruce.
Yeah.
But file share replacement, we talk about what OneDrive and what SharePoint Online offer in terms of document storage. But beyond the storage piece, it's the collaboration. It's people editing documents at the same time, working on documents within teams that is a little bit different than, the file share experience where, you can't necessarily be editing a document at the same time as somebody else. You're locked out for making changes. And there's not necessarily version history on these types of things for changes that are made. So we've seen plenty of organizations replace the home drive with OneDrive for Business. Moving to Microsoft's, not worrying about that storage on premises anymore. And then SharePoint Online, I would say, is a larger undertaking for trying to replace, organization-wide file shares. We've seen that a little bit less, but there are certainly capabilities if you've got it designed properly and you've thought through the variables and how it's going to be used.
And Adam, why don't you and I just brainstorm, 5 reasons why OneDrive might be better than, I'll call it a Y drive, or, something that's on a file server for someone's personal files. You go with number 1.
Well, for my own purposes, I access it on my phone. So if I'm walking into a presentation, I've got my PowerPoint saved in my OneDrive. I might be looking at it on the train before I get to the client. That's certainly something I've used it for.
Okay, I'll give you a second advantage. In my opinion, just the ability to share those files easily. So rather than sending things as an attachment, I can instead send a share link. That's easy both through the web browser version as well as the client-based version. So something that looks like it's on my hard drive, I can right-click share and send you a link to that wasn't possible, obviously, when it was a Y drive. Give me a third advantage.
It's probably kind of in that same vein, but the synchronization, you mentioned that something that looks like it's on your hard drive. OneDrive for Business does have the capability to do selective synchronization of things, and so I always have my OneDrive files synchronized to my desktop. Most of the time I'm accessing them just through Windows Explorer, but they aren't all necessarily saved to my system and using up space, and so they are synchronized to Microsoft's cloud. And from a administrator and security perspective, we have policies around where these things can be synchronized and how they can be shared and controlled from a governance perspective.
Fourth advantage I can think of is browser-based access to these files. So independent of what device I'm on, I know you talked about your mobile device, and certainly our PC's got a synced copy of it. But having a browser-based version, so if I'm on someone else's machine, or if the browser just tends to be a lot faster also than opening up a PowerPoint in a browser is almost instantaneous, whereas opening up a PowerPoint, that might be 120, a meg or something of that nature requires almost the whole, item to be downloaded. So the experience with opening things in a browser is much faster. Fifth advantage that you can think of, or?
I'll close it with co-authoring, because you and I do use this frequently because you and I present together a lot, and we're putting decks together. We did it this morning, and you might be working on one slide while I'm working on another. So I would say that's a huge advantage. It allows us to be on, whether we're on the same call while we're working on it, or we're just working independently but working on the same document and not trying to merge changes later into some type of final version. The final version is there as it sits.
So those are real advantages. I would say that OneDrive migration has been it's kind of the second wave, if you will, of people trying to find value out of the licensing they've purchased. OneDrive certainly has a lot of end user benefits. I think there are a lot of IT benefits. I would say that a lot more people are moving to OneDrive now than they were a couple of years ago. That said, it's still probably in the it's probably in percent of the, if there's 100% of people that own E3, probably 20% are leveraging the power of OneDrive organizationally. They might have pockets of use that are much higher than that, but organizationally, 20% would be my guess. So we'll move on.
Internal communication, we still do see this used for that, and Teams has kind of made this even, I guess, open up more opportunities for this as well. We're still seeing Teams adoption take shape a little bit, but Skype for Business has been a core element of Office 365 for a long time. Functions for us as our entire phone system, but I do think at the very least, as an internal communication system, it is extremely popular among our client base from the perspective of seeing presence of other users and creating on-the-fly meetings and creating scheduled meetings within the Outlook calendar. We do see it picked up a lot. And then lastly, and I would say this one's kind of fallen off a little bit as Microsoft has gotten a little bit less aggressive in their discounting on things like enterprise agreements, but kind of out of the gate, there were a lot of organizations that we saw going to Office 365 or to different licensing SKUs of Office 365 because they were ready to replace their Office licensing, and Microsoft was offering a good deal on kind of handling that upgrade and licensing the upgrade through that. And so that was one of the things we definitely saw out of the gate.
It is a rent versus buy discussion, though, here about Office. I mean, you buy Office, a copy, an open copy or so. It's probably $250 to $300 was my guess. Purchase some software assurance potentially on top of that to keep the revs. So you're buying Office 2016 with software assurance, and let's just call it $300. Office as a rental is $12.50 a month, so you can purchase just that, or it can be bundled in, obviously, under many different suites. But $12.50 a month, right, for an employee, there's a fair amount of time before you pay back on your Office license. Office licenses or Office changes are occurring in terms of enhancements. Office 2016 is a very, very old copy of Office right now. So if those running on 2013 and 2010, those are extremely old, right? And in fact, Office 2010 is in a about to go into a support where end of support, if you will. But Office 2016's had 60, 80 upgrades to it already from a cloud perspective. So it's there are people that are kind of on the train and on the rental train that are purchasing it, and there are people that are choosing to kind of purchase Office the way it's always been purchased. And I think it's smart to kind of look at what your options are in that space.
Bruce, we had kind of held some whiteboard time. Do you want a whiteboard here, or do you want to?
Let's not. Yeah, okay. I think let's go wait for another one. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. As I mentioned, so those are kind of the main reasons we see people moving to Office 365. From a what we've learned perspective of just kind of this kind of things fall in the category here of tips and tricks, or just things that we think are lesser known that people should be deploying. One thing we want to key in on is audit logs in Office 365. So, moving the environment to the cloud, you might forget some things that you don't necessarily have as much access to or control of when you initially set it up. But audit logs is something that's been evolving as Office 365 has matured, and in general, you want to make sure all your audit logs are turned on. If there is if you face business email compromise, or if you need to do some type of forensics on it, you have to have those logs there. So you should go verify today that your audit logs are gathering data for you. I believe off the top of my head, Bruce, I think it's 30 days 90 days on retention of those. So make sure that you have that enabled. Data loss prevention. So this was something that actually grew up in Exchange Server. I think it first appeared in Exchange 2010, but it got much better as it moved to Office 365 and now has expanded even to OneDrive and SharePoint. But data loss prevention is the ability to put some policies around email and around documents stored in the Office 365 locations about what types of data they can store and types of data that can be sent and who they can be sent to. So when we talk about things like credit cards or social security numbers or PII, and handling that type of sensitive information, DLP gives you the capabilities to build these policies around how that data is handled. And especially if you are an organization that is regulated, you should be looking into some of the DLP capabilities to help you meet those regulatory requirements. Email encryption. This tends to be one of those features that people don't have deployed yet, really, or may not know as much about, but you do have email encryption capabilities in Office 365. So you can either set up policies on the back end that say if this email contains a social security number, it has to be encrypted, or you give your end users the capability to encrypt an email at will, or you do a little bit of both, like I think most organizations do, is give their users some capability, but also for certain things, make sure you're encrypting anyway.
Yeah, your banks don't send you statements, electronically through email, right? There's a reason for that. Email, by its very nature, is open and can be viewed. So take the same measure of practice that your banks leverage, which is, don't send stuff through the email, and apply it to your organization. What stuff and what data do you have that probably shouldn't be going out via email? Whether it be, password information, whether it be, customer lists, customer sensitive data, accounts, even amongst your sales, maybe there's some things that shouldn't be going on. And, obviously, you can educate your users to take advantage of some capability. Say, hey, put secure in the subject line, and that would flag it as secure, and that requires obviously the user to have knowledge on what your rule is as to how to encrypt the mail, and which essentially would go through the data loss prevention, and the rule would say, oh, they put secure in the subject line, therefore I'm going to do email encryption here. Or you can use DLP to just kind of scrutinize every email going in and out. I'll call it machine learning, might be the popular term of the day, but basically have it scrutinize, say, oh, wow, I see 3 customer records in here, customer records being XXX-XX, or some kind of pattern, and if you see this pattern, encrypt it. Right? So even if the user doesn't encrypt it, let the back-end machine encrypt it. There are industry stats saying that maybe 5% of emails should be encrypted nowadays and aren't. So it's a technology that's in there in your Office 365, and we're helping a fair number of users set that up as they kind of realize that from a governance perspective they have to do it, and then for other security conscious organizations they want to do it. So it would be a smart thing to take advantage of, we think, within the stack, and probably something you own.
The other thing is advanced threat protection, which is something that Microsoft introduced about 2 years ago. Advanced threat protection started as a extra layer of email filtering that targeted specifically attachments. So it overwrites attachments. It takes a look at where those so links, it overwrites links and looks at where those specifically go to, including redirects, make sure it's not going to a malicious site. It does check links at time of click. So if a website is redirected later on to a malicious site, it's checking and it's blocking those sites or those users from going to those sites. So safe links is one piece of that. Safe attachments is the other piece, where it looks to identify attachments and determine if they are safe or not, and if it cannot determine, kind of running them through a extra layer of filtering and into a detonation chamber, where it ultimately the computer is running this in a sandbox and determining if it is safe or not. So there's about a 4-hour window between when Microsoft's multiple antivirus engines knows about a new piece of malware. And that 4-hour window is what you're protecting against, right? People call them the 0-day, but it just takes a while for the engines, which are signature-based and heuristics-based, to know about something new in the wild. And basically, there's an increasing number of 0-day malwares, as you can imagine. People are prototyping and copying other pieces of malware that were out there. And that 4-hour gap is kind of what you're betting against if you don't have ATP. So we're heavily advising that as a piece of technology to help you minimize the risk relative to email. So that was the core of ATP when it was first introduced. It's still a main component of it. The other part that was introduced, I want to say somewhere between March and May of last year, that I think is less deployed, but if you own ATP, you should definitely go and verify that you have this set, and you should probably have some regular review of this to make sure you have you're adding people to it as employee turnover occurs. But it has anti-phishing capabilities, and this is primarily around domain spoofing and user spoofing. And so you can protect certain domains. Say you work with a partner organization frequently, or you work with maybe you work with Peters and Associates as a support or managed services contract. You can protect our domain peters.com, and when emails come in from a Peters with a 3 instead of an E in it, attempting to impersonate us, which is, there's nothing we can do about that on our side of things, you will receive a notice, or you can block that email and prevent those type of obvious spoofing emails from getting through. You can equally protect certain users in your organization, and so if you, for instance, want to protect, we protect all of our managers at Peters and Associates, and so if I got an email from a bruce.ward@gmail.com, it would tell me, hey, this looks similar to an email address that Bruce frequently sends from, but this is not actually the email address that he uses with you, or the organizational email address. And so preventing things like spoofing of that, or we had an attempt using something similar to our president's email address a couple weeks ago, and we were notified by the program that this was an attempted spoofing attempt. So that's something you should definitely set up as well. The last one that we had kind of called out here is collaboration design, and this is an age-old problem since the inception of Office 365. They've given you, let's call it, at least half a dozen collaboration tools and platforms across the entire suite, and there's always a discussion of where do I do what types of.
Let's list some of them, Adam. What are? I'll start with one. Planner.
Okay, that's one. Yep. SharePoint.
I'll go Teams. That's an easy one.
Yeah. OneDrive.
Groups.
Okay, we've got Yammer.
We got Skype.
We've got email.
I'm gonna go OneNote.
I think.
Yeah, we could be exhausting the list. Yeah, we could be exhausting the list there. But yeah, there's 8 different tools, right, to get things done. Which tool's the best, right? And we've morphed, right? In early on, I don't know, Adam, you remember 3-4 years ago, Groups was all the rage.
Yep.
Right? Groups was the rage. In fact, so much so that I remember going to a meeting with one of our account managers. We walked into this organization that had allowed groups to go for a few months, and they were dealing with 1,500 different new groups that had been created because the functionality lied with the end users. And in this particular environment, the end users started running rampant with the idea, and now IT was dealing with what we'll call group sprawl. Right? You see something similar probably now, Adam, with Yammer, right? Mm-hmm. Those Yammer sites, where Adam and I are invited to several Yammer sites at Microsoft. I don't know what they have as an organization, but I probably dance among 20 or 30 Yammer sites that we've been invited to. How does one track all this, from a collaboration perspective? How do you design what it is you want to do as a goal, and which tool do you use? And so there's, Microsoft's trying very hard right now to have Teams be the end-all be-all, and we certainly see some good momentum around that solution, but it definitely requires some thought before you begin. So.
Okay, and that closes us out from an Office 365 perspective.
Yeah, the only thing I'd point out is on ATP, back when you were mentioning the phishing item, I would just say, do know that if you own ATP, or even if you purchase ATP, the phishing element, the default setup is that it's off. The default setup is that no domain is protected. The default setup is that no users are protected. So you need to turn it on and enter in which people in your organization. Typically, it's your C-suite, your people that might be dealing with financials, such as wire transfers. These are the people that often get impersonated, and it requires you to A, turn it on, and B, tell the system who you'd like to protect. You're entitled to protect up to 60 people, and so there's a little bit of setup, not a lot, but to make the product work effectively, do know that the default is not the best way to go. Sure.
Okay, Enterprise Mobility and Security Suite, just like Office 365, it has a number of different components. So it has identity management capabilities, it has device security capabilities, document security, and then access management for applications. And then drilling in deeper to the different, what all of that means across the stack is mobile application management and things like multi-factor authentication. Could also get into things like conditional access, which are all kind of tied together. So that's the entirety of the suite itself. And Bruce, do you want to whiteboard some of this stuff for Enterprise Mobility Suite, or should I go deeper on these?
I'd love to. Are you kidding?
Okay.
Everybody likes
All
to
right.
see the crayon come out.
Yeah, so I will go ahead and start high leveling these if you want to get yourself ready to whiteboard.
All right.
So top use cases that we're seeing across the enterprise mobility and security space is single sign-on. So you have the capability to connect to other cloud applications or on-prem applications, your Active Directory identities. So from a user perspective as well as just a management perspective, there's a shared identity coming from Active Directory and a little bit more control that you can put around these things like multi-factor authentication. So multi-factor can be extended to these applications, or you can should definitely be using it across something, at least admins on things like Office 365. And then this all relates to conditional access, so setting up different policies for different applications based on who a user is, where a user is logging in from, whether it's a machine that is domain joined or not domain joined, and it's from an IP that's recognized or an IP that's not on U.S. soil. Lots of different policies that you can build around this to determine if somebody is secure when they are joining. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our resident amateur artist, Bruce, and go ahead and share your desktop.
Oh, it's quite amateur, I will just say. But the good news is, so I apologize for the crypticness here in the beginning, but the fact is your employees' goals are pretty easy to solve. Okay, they really have pretty simple needs. They need three things. Okay, they would like email anywhere and everywhere. They'd love their apps anywhere and anywhere. Anywhere and everywhere, and they love access to, I'll call it data, and by this I probably mean Word, Excel, just to kind of put some context around it. That's what they want, okay? And they would like it, they'd like it on lots of different devices, right? So whether it be a small little device with a button on it, a larger version of the same, whether it be a laptop of some kind, any kind of device. They'd also like this in any sort of situation, right? When they're working here, when they're working in the big corporate HQ, okay, when they're working at a Starbucks over a little cup of coffee, okay? Those are the situations they want it. They might use a browser, okay, in some cases, and they might use the full app, okay, of whether it be Office or other applications. That's all they want. So go deliver it, IT. Well, over here on your side, from an IT and a governance perspective, you have some concerns, right? You've got concerns regarding, and by the way, they want this easily delivered too. Don't make them log in multiple times. Make this as easy as possible for them. And so your charter is the fact of providing security. And some of your concerns are the following. A, you're concerned about loss. And in this particular case, I'm going to call it loss of data, loss of device. And so this area in here, these devices, you're concerned that that's going to fall into the wrong hands. There's some technology we're going to talk about under Windows 10 that's going to kind of cover that. You have another concern. You have a concern of loss of data, right? And the data itself, which was on those devices, but the loss of data, this could happen by not only the loss of a device, as we mentioned earlier, but let's say that they inadvertently or purposely took some data that was operating in one of the apps that you know about and love about, and they're going to use it over in their specialized personal app, right? And so they're going to take this data and they're going to basically exfiltrate it into their app. Well, you don't want that, right? So you want to kind of surround this app and say, I'm going to entitle you to that app, but not this app. I'm going to say, we'll call this the bad app. You're allowed to use the apps I tell you you're allowed to use, but not the bad apps. Okay, so we're going to talk about that technology kind of next and just kind of table setting for that. But in terms of ease, they've asked you to provide access into this world of email, applications, and data, and do so easily. Well, you've got some power and some tools at your disposal that you actually own if you're an E3 owner, even Office 365 E3, something called single sign-on, where not only do you have this apps that you decide are in the farm, you've got a whole treasure trove of, I don't know, Adam, what the number is today, but let's just call it 1,800 plus applications that are a part of a catalog that you can stage and ready to be part of your rectangle there in the middle. These are apps that you say, okay, as an organization, we embrace this app, we know that you're using it, and I can provide you single sign-on to that. And what that means is, within Active Directory, where their account currently exists, this entire thing is synchronized to something called Azure Active Directory, without giving you the nuances of it, and they're leveraging those same credentials to access everything in the box. Great. So single sign-on kind of provides the ease that they were looking for. But then there's certain situations where either you're accessing very sensitive data, okay, so I'll put sensitive data, or sensitive applications, or even some email that you might decide that's sensitive enough that I want to make sure that they are who they say they are, because this person wants to act like them. Okay, it's a little mini me, I'll call it, and we don't want little mini me's, right? We need to prevent this from occurring, the impersonation part, and that's where MFA can come in play. MFA, or multi-factor authentication, means that I can verify who you are, not because you know a login and password. Lots of people might know your login and password. In fact, I wonder if your child knows your login and password right now. Instead, what if I also had you authenticate additionally, not only with your login and password, passwords being traditionally pretty weak. I can make you change them 100 times, but even after that, you might write it on a Post-it or tell someone else, or it could be exposed in any of those, or it could be phished. In any of those cases, multi-factor authentication provides another layer of verifying that you are you as you go to access the box, if you will. So multi-factor authentication is great. And then, but that kind of negates if I'm going to make you log in and do a secondary MFA prompt every time you log into this box, I may have negated your ease factor. And so wouldn't it be great if I had certain situations where maybe, and I'll put this in a different color, maybe if I'm in the corporate office or I'm accessing certain applications or certain data, that I don't make you MFA. And in other situations, I do make you MFA. And that's a process called conditional access, where based on who you are, what time of day it is, what device you're on, what location you're in, and what data you're accessing, I can decide to turn on conditional. I can make choices along the route that maybe turn on MFA or ultimately might even block you from a certain application. So that's kind of the primer I would give to conditional access, MFA, and single sign-on. Single sign-on you own as part of E3. MFA and conditional access you can own as part of EMS. And Adam, why don't we go back to your EMS presentation, because I think that's kind of where you're going.
Yep. Okay.
Sorry for the scribbly scratch.
There we go. Okay. So, sorry, this slide should say EMS here, but from a what we've learned perspective, as Bruce walked us through kind of the ins and outs of what that EMS suite is doing for us, one of the things we've learned big time is the importance of data classification, especially as we talk about document level security and information rights management, or Azure information protection on those documents. We've seen a number of organizations start to explore this path. Some start to go down this path, and some start to implement. And one of our key takeaways, I think, from being involved in this is you really do need a good handle on what type of data you have. Having classification on that data, I think it's this exercise lends itself a little bit better to some regulated organizations who immediately know what their sensitive data is and what they want to classify as confidential or classify as sensitive, that only certain people in the organization should have access to. But data classification is an exercise that should be undertaken by multiple people in the organization. It would involve IT, it would involve stakeholders from various different departments in the organization and from leadership in the organization. But the importance of starting from data classification when we're talking about, document level security and implementing even some of these data loss prevention policies, it's something that you need to be prepared for.
And I think where we're seeing a fair amount of data classification, and one of the reasons why it makes the list is not that we're doing a ton of work in this space, but people are definitely starting to look at data classification now in light of compliance regulations such as GDPR, where it's asking you to make plans around data that contains personal information. It wants you, and there's also the California privacy law, which is going into effect in less than a year. So that if you're doing business in California, you're going to have to identify where those California residents' data is in a very timely manner. And so only by doing data classification, which on its onset might have no benefit to the end user whatsoever. However, it has a governance benefit and a kind of a risk offset because you've done your homework in advance to say, this data is the magic data that I'm going to need to go resurface later, potentially as part of a, as a GDPR, what they call data service request, or other requests that would be similar under the California privacy law.
Another thing which Bruce did cover in his whiteboard, and I don't know that I necessarily kind of labeled out the product names specifically as I talked about Enterprise Mobility Suite, but Intune has long been Microsoft's what we'll refer to as a universal device management solution, meaning that it has some management capabilities around PCs and around Macs, but it also competes in what's known as more broadly as the MDM space. And for a long time, that's what Intune positioned itself as full mobile device management and wiping devices when people leave the organization, and full capabilities around what you can prevent a certain device from doing. But more recently, people have gravitated towards the mobile application management side of things, so it's far less intrusive on what are generally BYOD devices. And so application management, building policies around specific business applications, and for us that is our Outlook applications and our Office applications on our phones. Other organizations might have other applications that are used by employees on mobile devices, whether it's Salesforce or maybe it's Concur, that you want your own policies around, like requiring a separate PIN or requiring network username login before accessing the application. So we are seeing more organizations have an appetite for MAM, where in the past MDM, full MDM was seen as far too intrusive. And then lastly, advanced threat analytics probably doesn't get talked about enough. It's a little bit of an outlier within this enterprise mobility and security suite, because whereas all these other resources we've talked about lie in the cloud and in Microsoft's data center and have a focus for securing these identities across the cloud, advanced threat analytics is actually focused on the on-prem world and evaluating authentications against Active Directory and looking at how users interact on your network to pick up anomalous behavior. So we all know that credentials could be stolen, and it's in the past it's been difficult for a computer to be able to discern whether, if I have stolen Bruce's credentials and I'm logging in, they still think it's Bruce. This anomaly detection is looking at how Bruce behaves, what times he logs in, where he logs in from, and the types of resources he accesses, and can determine, if that behavior starts to change or changes suddenly, maybe there's something going on here where we want to require Bruce to go, enter MFA again, or we want to verify that it's them. So that again faces back towards the on-prem world, but is definitely something that people should explore.
Yeah, I mean, the keys to your kingdom are in Active Directory, right? And if you knew everything that was going on within Active Directory, you would have a much more secure environment. It's very difficult to know everything that's going on in AD because people get added to groups and people do what they call lateral movements within there in terms of elevating privileges, and without a tool, you have no insight. And so ATA is the tool, relatively light from a alerting perspective. So IT is not going to be burdened with quote unquote another tool, but it's aimed right at the heart of where things occur, which is Active Directory. And all this time we've been talking about a lot of cloud products. This is something that is on-prem. It's got the cloud smarts, but it's delivered on-prem against your Active Directory, and nothing's more important than your AD.
Yep. So the last major pillar of the Microsoft 365 stack is a component that is not necessarily a bundle. It is Windows 10. It is Windows as you know it, though licensing is managed through this subscription now, as opposed to what in the past may have been perpetual licenses. So Windows 10, from a platform perspective and why people are moving towards it, some device security capabilities, remote worker capabilities, and some of the patch management pieces, and then kind of at the deeper level, something called Defender ATP. So top use cases for Windows 10, as it is, I think with a lot of operating system upgrades, end of support is one of the main drivers, right? We know that Windows 7 is coming to end of support, and people need to start mapping out what their path to Windows 10 is if they haven't done so already. You don't want to be in a position where you're still relying on Windows 7 and security patches stop coming down, because that's when it is kind of free game in terms of exploiting some of the things found in Windows 7 that will no longer be patched. From a workstation security perspective, some of these things I think you can have been in past versions, but we still do see a lot of interest and maybe increased interest in lately in terms of BitLocker. So BitLocker is encryption on the OS, so securing the data at the endpoint level. And then I think we'd also point to some newer features like Credential Guard and Secure Guard that are built into Windows 10 or Windows 10 specific. Bruce, I know you're a user of Windows Hello from a login perspective, and kind of another factor of authentication in terms of your face over just password login.
Yeah, and I look at it less as a security than a convenience, right? I think it's rather than having to type, just using your face. It's pretty much the reason why Apple sort of did the same thing on their ID, right? They went from fingerprint to face, and so it's just a convenience thing, and probably saving me 15, 20 logins a day based on just putting my face in front of the machine. So certainly a part of the security puzzle, but whether you type it or use your face, at least you have confidence that you are you to the machine. And certainly things like MFA on that experience are coming to Windows 10 also. So,
yep. So we're definitely seeing a lot of our Windows 10 deployments are starting with workshopping and going through some of the newer features, understanding Device Guard and Credential Guard and Windows Hello and what needs to be included in the pilot, and then what ultimately gets distributed to everybody. And then from a remote worker perspective, we are still huge proponents of direct access. We do see it replacing VPN in some cases, and that's something that's included in Windows 10 as well.
On end of support, I just mentioned that not only is Windows 7 going end of support on January 14th of 2020, which is now 11 months away, so everyone has to get off Windows 7. The Windows 10, over half of the versions of Windows 10 are also end of support already. So the solution's been out there for quite a long time, and each spring or each fall, one of the older versions kind of drops off the market. So.
Yep, that's a good segue because that's exactly what this is about. Windows 10 did introduce the concepts of long branch and short branch update management, but I do think one of our key learnings has been the fact that some Windows 10 versions are already end of support, and I think Microsoft probably has a messaging issue there because in the past we would have thought of the major version of something going to end of support, but now it's certain builds, and that's something that you should be aware of. We do have an end of support page that is, I think, going up on our website within the next week that can help you to kind of track some of those things, but that's something definitely to pay attention to. Patch extension, Bruce, you actually mentioned this to me this morning, so I'm going to let you speak to this part with Pro and patch extension.
Okay, yeah, generally the reason for Pro is the version that everybody kind of gets by default, if you will. That's the free version of Windows 10 or the version that potentially some had been on as an upgrade from their Windows 7 or Windows 8 Pro. Windows 10 Enterprise, or there's Enterprise E3 and there's Enterprise E5, but in any case, the Enterprise version entitles you to an additional 12-month extension period, 12 or 18 months extension period on patching. So there's a reason to purchase the Enterprise version and possibly the M365 suite if you need other features, but that Enterprise version entitles you to be on that platform for a little bit longer and on that version.
Yep. And then lastly is the deploy design piece, Bruce, or deployment design, which I think we talked about this morning.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of buckets effectively for how you want to get from your current state, whether it be Windows 7 or Windows 8 up into Windows 10. You know, you have to take into account, are you buying brand new machines? Are they going to be in-place upgrades? Are you going from Pro to Enterprise? Are you going from 32-bit to 64-bit? Are your drivers supportive of it? So we effectively put things into 6 different buckets as to what your upgrade model is going to look like. And then also from a design perspective, you're going to want to accommodate things like personalization features, which is, what information do you want to provide to Microsoft, if any, with regards to personalization capabilities within the product. There's group policies that might need to get modified, and then there's application compatibility. And just, for the most part, 99.8% of apps are going to work fine under Windows 10, but lo and behold, you're going to want to go through some testing or piloting mechanism to validate that for your own environment. So I'd say that's it.
Yep, so I think that closes out some of the prepared content that we have. Again, please type questions in below. We're going to run right up against the clock here, but Bruce and I will hang around afterwards, or at least I will, Bruce. I don't know if you have a competing meeting, but we'll be around to answer questions. From a what's next perspective, we do have offerings around Office 365 to help you, around Microsoft 365 to help you either get started or kind of enhance what you're doing out there. So we have a multi-factor authentication offering built where we'll get you running on that. A security health check for Office 365. So if you've been there for a little while, or maybe you've just set it up yourself, we do have engineers that do security health checks just to make sure that all the things are configured, like Bruce mentioned on ATP, the anti-phishing stuff, or making sure that audit logs are turned on, or a host of 40 other features that we want to make sure are configured to best security practices. Enterprise Mobility Suite Fast Track. So if you are just dipping your toe there, you kind of liked what you saw, or you already own the licensing, that's something where we can kind of get you up and moving quickly. And then our weekly security audit for Office 365 is one of our managed services offerings. We built a tool that is looking at those logs and looking at specific anything that could potentially indicate that somebody else is accessing the mailbox. And then, if you're interested in learning more, we have a number of blog posts and previous webinars on these topics. These are all posted to our website, peters.com/blogs will take you there. With that, I think I'm going to close things out and open it up to questions, and Sam can go ahead and stop the recording in just a moment. But thank you all very much for joining. I know this was a lot of material all at once. We didn't get into a lot of specifics, but please, if you have further questions or you want to dive a bit deeper, please reach out to Bruce or I, and we'd be happy to help you out. Thank you very much for joining.